Hello and welcome to this Tungsten Cluster Masterclass training session where we take a look at some cluster maintenance. In this session we will cover how to simply stop and start the software, how we isolate nodes within the cluster to perform maintenance, and we will also take a look at changing or adding additional options within the cluster, and we'll cover the rolling maintenance process, finally looking at how to upgrade the Tungsten software. So first, starting and stopping Tungsten. To manage the system components, you have two options. You can either use the aliases start all and stop all to handle everything at once, or you can start and stop each component individually. For example, you can use commands like manage a start, manage a stop, or manage a restart. When it comes to registering or deregistering components with system or systemctl, you use the deploy all and undeploy all commands and then follow the on-screen prompts. During installation, if you want to automatically execute the deploy all, and make sure that you set that flag install equals true. This simplifies the deployment process and will ensure that if any of your hosts reboots unexpectedly, the Tungsten software will automatically restart. Finally, if you're stopping components manually, it's important to place the cluster into maintenance mode. This helps prevent any unexpected failovers during the start or stop process. So let's just take a quick look at what that looks like on our demo cluster. So on here you will see I have the usual cluster, so these are my two connector hosts, and over here I have the three database nodes, databases 1, 2 and 3. I'm just going to, for the purpose of the demo, show you this on a connector host. First of all, you have the connector command and you can do connector status, and that will show you that the service is running. You can then do connector stop, you can do connector restart, or you can simply do connector start. Now these hosts have also been set up with the install equals true flag during the installation process, so therefore they are registered with systemctl. So in that respect I can do sudo systemctl and then I will do stop, and it's T connector. So all of the components, once registered with systemctl, have this T preceding them, so it'll be T connector, T replicator, T manager. So I'll just go ahead and execute that, and then we'll return to the prompt once the connector has been stopped. There we go. So if I run the connector status now, we can see the connector service is not running. So I can use the same command to start them, do systemctl start T connector, or I can simply do connector start. All of these commands will work interchangeably. If you do the connector commands, it knows that we're set up with systemd, so it will effectively run behind the scenes the sudo systemctl start T connector. Now on the database nodes, over here, first of all, I'm going to put my cluster into maintenance mode, so tpm policy -m, or I could have gone into cctrl and executed set policy maintenance, and on this particular host I'm then just going to do stop all. So you'll see the aliases, and in this instance I only have the manager and the replicator running on this instance, so it will only stop those two services. If I had a connector, it would also stop the connector. And there we go, everything is stopped, and then I can also do start all. Very simple and easy command there to use. The next step is updating cluster properties. So when making changes, the first step is to update the tungsten.ini file as needed based on your requirements. Next, you place the cluster into maintenance mode to ensure a safe operating state while making changes. Then isolate the specific node by running the cctrl datasource shun command. This prevents it from participating in cluster activity during the update. Once isolated, execute the tpm update command to apply your changes. After the update is complete, reintroduce the node back into the cluster to resume normal operations. Finally, it's always important to test your changes in a development environment before applying them to production. This helps avoid unexpected issues and ensures a much smoother deployment. So how does that look in our test environment? Back on the nodes, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to first of all actually edit all of my instances. And I'm going to make a change in here. Let's say I want to change the memory allocation for the replicator. So I'm going to insert the property and the value. so 2 gig. And obviously all of these TPM properties are listed in the documentation. There's lots of them, and this is just one example. What it's important to note is if you are making changes, ideally you should make the changes to every node within the cluster. There may be occasions where that's not necessary, and if you're dealing with continuance support, then they will advise you accordingly. But if you are doing this on your own, then always make the same changes everywhere so that every node is running the same. It'll avoid any confusion or complications. So once we've made that change, we're now going to execute the TPM update process, which will apply that change. Now we're only making a change to the replicator, so TPM update is intelligent enough to know that that is the only change. So as part of the application of this property, it will only restart the replicator. It won't restart every part of the software. So in theory, we could just execute TPM update and let that process happen on all of the nodes. We could even do it all at once if we want. But if you're ever uncertain, then what I would always recommend is, as we have done here, place the replicator into maintenance mode and then just do one node at a time. And as explained in the slides, the ability to isolate the nodes will also give you extra protection. So first of all, I'm going to go into cctrl. I'll just do an ls on there and just make sure that we know which node we're talking about. So we have db1 is the primary and db2 are the 2 replicators, and you see my replicators are offline at the moment, and that's because I'm in maintenance mode and I've been doing some testing on here. So let me just put this back into automatic mode and make sure those replicators come online before I make any changes. So we'll just wait for a moment or two, and the automatic mode will bring those online as it has there. So let's go back into maintenance mode, and then what we're going to do is we'll make the change first of all on db2, which is our slave node here. So first of all, I will do datasource db2 shun. Say yes. Now if I look in the cctrl now, we see that this node is now shunned. Now what shunning means is that the connectors, they will see that this node is shunned and they won't send traffic to this node. So traffic will only now go to db1 and db3. This is super handy, especially if you're making changes that will stop and start the replicator. If it's quite a big change, if you're making lots of changes and the replicator will be off for a period of time, then it will ensure that your applications don't read stale data. It will also ensure that if you are making changes to the managers, if there's a failover happens, you don't want this node to be promoted whilst you're doing maintenance to it. So what we'll then do is on db2, we will issue the TPM update command. That will take a few moments to run. Once that's finished, I can then reintroduce this node back into the cluster and perform the same updates elsewhere. Now, because the change I'm making is only to the Tungsten software, it will restart the components, the managers, the replicators. We don't need to do a switch. We don't have to move the master to one of the other nodes. We can actually just do the TPM update in place on the primary node. However, you should never shun a primary node. Therefore, if we want to make the change on db1, the master, just make sure you're in maintenance mode, leave everything as it is, and just execute TPM update. So I will do that now as well, just to show you that it's perfectly safe to do. We're in maintenance mode, we do the update will carry on. If you left the cluster into automatic mode and you did an update that restarted the manager process, there is a risk. It's a very low risk, but there is a risk that might trigger a failover depending upon the nature of the change, whether the change was successful, what state the cluster is left in after the change has been made. If the change you make fails, then it could trigger a failover. So you always want to be a little bit careful when you're doing this. Hence why leave everything in maintenance mode, and that will give you that complete control. We see that the update on db2 has complete. So if I look at the replicator now, I will now go and reintroduce db2 back into the cluster. But just while I want to point this out, as we see, db3 is now showing the replicator is in a state of synchronizing. That's because we're running the TPM update on db1, and that db1 replicator will be in a restarting state. So it will actually make a change, and the replicator on DB3 is saying I'm synchronizing because I've lost my connection to the primary. Once that TPM update has finished on DB1, that will resolve itself. But whilst we wait for that update to complete, let's just do the DB2 restore, and simply we just welcome that back into the cluster. Okay, and it's back in. It's saying it's offline at the moment, and that's because it's still in maintenance mode. The replicator is offline. We can see the DB1 update has finished and its replicator is also offline. But we know we've made those changes now, we're happy. For the purpose of the demo, let's just pretend that I've made that change to DB3, and then we'll just set the policy of the cluster back to automatic. And what we will see in a second or two is that all of these nodes will come online. I'll just wait for DB2 to come online. There we go. So DB2 is now online. Everything's there. Primary's online, replicators are online, managers are online, replication is flowing. The progress is showing the same on every node. To be safe, we could do a cluster heartbeat. And then we can see in a second that's getting 862. We've incremented to 863, so we know that heartbeat's working and replication is flowing. And that's a very simple change to the INI file. So rolling maintenance, I kind of touched on this a little bit in the demonstration just now. However, this is more essential when you are making significant operating system changes and you need to stop all of the software, potentially including MySQL. Now, this particular slide here is showing the example of you want to upgrade MySQL to a newer version. So what is a rolling maintenance? Well, first of all, you would shun the replica node. So as I just did in my demonstration, I did the datasource DB2 shun. So you would shun the node. Once you've shunned the node, you can then stop all the software on that host. So you can then go to the command line and you can issue stop all on that host. Then you can do whatever you need to do, upgrade MySQL, upgrade operating system, patch the operating system, upgrade. There's lots of different things that you might want to do on the operating system at that point. Do everything you want to do, start everything up, restart the software, issue start all and restart the Tungsten software, wait till everything has come up online, and then you just return that node into the cluster using the datasource welcome command that I explained. If anything fails, you have a disaster, the database breaks, whatever, then you can reprovision that node before you welcome it to the cluster. Once all that's done, you repeat that same process on the other replica nodes. So by the end of that, you will have all of your replicas upgraded, patched, fixed, exactly how you want them to be, and it's now time for you to do the same on the primary node. At this point, you will have to do a switch. So you issue the switch the primary to promote the upgraded replica. Once that switch is complete and you're happy that the cluster is operational again, you can then repeat that upgrade process. So shun that node, what was the old primary and is now a replica, shun it, stop everything, do your upgrade, and then reintroduce it back into the cluster. And that's your maintenance process done. Now, if you want, you can then switch back to that node and promote that node to be the master again if you wish. But you don't have to. The intelligence within the cluster means that any node can be the primary and the connectors will just deal with that accordingly. So that's a very simple rolling maintenance. Now, what is important to note is that the rolling maintenance should not be used when doing software upgrades for the Tungsten software only, and I'll explain that as we go through this particular slide. So first of all, with an upgrade, whether you're upgrading a patch release, so for example going from version 8.0.0 to 8.0.1, or whether you're going to major release, whether it's for example 8.0 to version 9 or version 10 or whatever, things like that, then the process is the same. However, I would always recommend that you check the release notes. Okay, so for every release, always head onto the website, our documentation website, check the release notes for the version that you want to upgrade to. In there you will see a list of all of the fixes, improvements, bug fixes, etc. Any decommission commands will be listed there, but what also will be listed there is if there is a reason why you can't do a simple upgrade, it will mention any details there. For example, in the earlier versions of Tungsten, it wasn't possible to go directly from, say, version 5 to version 7, so you had to kind of do a stepped upgrade from version 5 to 6 to 7. Anything like that will be outlined in the documentation, so please do check that before doing anything. Once you've checked that, you've downloaded the software, you've put the software on every node, you will then place your cluster into maintenance mode. The maintenance mode, again, will ensure that no failovers happen, and it will make sure that the cluster is safe for you to perform these upgrade steps. But as part of the upgrade, it will restart the manager, it will restart the replicator. So if you're in maintenance mode, those restarts won't impact your operations. Then on each node, you issue this tools tpm update replace release command. And this is issued from the software that you are upgrading, and I will show you that on a demonstration shortly. Finally, part of that is add the no connectors option if you are running this on a connector host or if your connectors coexist on database nodes. And what will happen is the update will upgrade the software for the connectors, but it won't restart the connectors. Restarting the connector is the only point at which it could cause interruptions to your applications because connections may be terminated. So this process will be a two-step process. You do the update with no connectors. Then when you are ready and you are able to control that connectivity, you can then issue the promote connector or the connector restart to allow those connectors to come online with the new versions of the software. And this means that you can then, if you're using other load balancing solutions like HA proxy or anything in front of the connectors, you can drain connections, make sure that your applications won't be impacted when those connectors get restarted, and it'll give you that chance to do that. Finally, do not switch when doing different Tungsten versions. And that comes back to what I just said on the previous slide about the rolling maintenance window. We don't do the switch if you are upgrading Tungsten software. And that's because there may be incompatibilities with the manager communications between versions. So the managers on an older version may not be able to communicate to managers on a newer version and vice versa. So if you try to do a switch from a node that's on an old version to a node that's on a new version, the switch may fail and it may leave your cluster in a very unstable state. When everything's finished, return your cluster to automatic and your upgrade is complete. So let me show you and walk you through that process. So on these hosts, let me just clear my screen. If I go to opt continuous software, I've downloaded the software already. So here we are, Tungsten clustering. I'm on Tungsten clustering 800 and I'm going to upgrade to 801. So I've downloaded the tar file and I'm going to extract that tar file like so. And I also have this software on my connector nodes. So let me do the same thing over here. Opt continuant software, and I'll extract that software like so. Okay, software's extracted. I've read the release notes. I know that everything is good for me to upgrade. So first of all, I'm going to upgrade my cluster. So first step, tpm policy -m, put the cluster into maintenance mode, or I could go into cctrl and do the set policy maintenance. And then what I'm going to do is I will go into the Tungsten clustering directory and I can do tools, tpm update, replace release. Now I don't have connectors on my database nodes, so I don't need to put the no connectors on this particular hosts. Ideally in your production environment, your development environment, if you can do the command on all of the hosts at one go, great. Otherwise just do one host at a time. I would recommend doing the replicas first and the primary last. But what I would not recommend is doing an upgrade on a replica, for example, and then waiting 2 or 3 days before you do the next replica, and then another 2 or 3 days before you do the primary. That's especially important if you are going to major versions, because as I said, if those managers aren't able to communicate across version and you leave several days between doing each node, then you are putting your cluster at risk. So when you do the upgrade, you need to commit to doing the entire cluster at the same time, or at least within the same time frame, so it's one node directly after another or all in one go. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to do all of them all in one go. So I've got my command ready, and I'll just issue that command. What I'm going to do now, whilst that's running in the background, is I'm going to go over to my connector hosts, and I'll do the same thing here. But on my connector hosts, I will add the no connectors option. And that will, as I say, that will do the update. It'll put the software in place, but it won't restart. No, change into the directory first. But it won't restart those connectors. There we go. So let that command run. So whilst the update is running in the background there, it may take a while. If you imagine what it's doing here is unpacking that software and it's putting it into a new releases directory, which I'll show you when it's finished. It will update those sim links, it will restart the software and get everything running on that new release for you. Let me see, the connectors are running in the background there. Okay, the connectors are finished. They would be quicker because we said no connectors, so it's not having to restart the software. But just to show you what I mean by the releases directory, we now have the Tungsten Clustering 801 directory in there as well as the 800. And if I just drop back a directory, and we see that the symlink for Tungsten is now pointing to 801. However, if we look at the connector in the process list, we will still see, obviously there's quite a lot of output there, but we'll still see that the connector is actually running version 800, and that's because we said no connector, so it hasn't done that restart. So I'm going to wait for my cluster to finish first before I do the promotion of the connectors. Okay. It says here everything is completed successfully. There's no errors, no reports of any issues with any of the properties. We'll just go into one host here. We'll go into cctrl. We can see when we log into cctrl we're running version 801, and then we'll just do an ls. Okay, and we can see everything is looking good. Things are still offline because we're in maintenance mode, and obviously part of the process is to restart the software. And when you restart the replicator comes online, but it's in an offline state. So what we're going to do, I'm happy with all of that. So we'll put the cluster back into automatic mode, and then we'll just wait a second or two for it to bring those replicators online. We can see they're coming online now. There we go. So the cluster is now upgraded. Everything is good. So all we have left to do now are the connectors. So let's say, for example, my applications have been temporarily stopped, or they can handle a disconnect gracefully, or you have some other application load balancing in front of these connectors. All my traffic has now been rerouted to connector 1, which is still running. So on connector 2, I'm going to do TPM promote connector. And you see I did tab there to do autocomplete just to make sure I didn't do any typos. So that's connector 2, and what that simply is going to do is basically a very simple stop and start of the connector. Wait for that to finish. Commands complete successfully. So if I look at the PS for this connector now, we can see it's now running version 801, whereas the old one is running 800. I would then switch my apps, so all of my apps can now use connector 2, and then I can do the TPM promote connector on connector 1, and then once that's finished, that's it. The cluster is upgraded to the latest release. Very simple, very straightforward. So what did we learn? Well, we went through the stop and starting of the software and registering with the systemctl. We looked at isolating clusters using the datasource shun command and the datasource welcome command to bring the cluster back into the nodes. We looked at updating the tungsten.ini and issuing the TPM update for those parameters to be applied. We talked about the rolling maintenance and how to do a rolling maintenance for upgrading MySQL or making operating system changes. And then we finished with a demonstration of how to upgrade the Tungsten software. And that's it for this session. So I hope you found it useful. Thank you for listening, and I will speak to you again very soon. Thank you and goodbye.